My advice to interviewees, first of all, is to prepare. I'm very keen on the effort that people put in when they come to me for a job, because it shows me how they're likely to be in future. The truth of the matter is that if people aren't ready to make an effort to prepare for where they think they may want to work, then they're unlikely to succeed when they get there. The fact of the matter is that you need to research the company you're going to. You need to understand a modicum of their business, who runs the company, how things are going for them, what the press think about them, what your friends and family think about them, how the brand's related. And then you need to dress appropriately. If you're going for an interview as somebody who's going to represent that company, you need to be smart for your interview. If you're going as somebody creative, you might want to wear different coloured socks and a kilt. It isn't about being prescriptive about what you should do, it's about being appropriate to the situation you find yourself in. And if you don't know, ask somebody who may do. Reach out. Social media is fantastic. It's a tool I didn't have when I was younger, and I use it all the time now. Without it, my job would be almost impossible. Asking other people's opinions doesn't mean you need to slavishly follow them, but it does give you some idea of the background. And the last thing, of course, just before we talk about pre-interview, is actually getting there on time. There is nothing more disappointing than when the interviewer, not the interviewee, has prepared, got some questions ready, and is genuinely looking forward to seeing somebody they could be spending a large chunk of their life with going forward, and then that person doesn't turn up on time. And there's always an excuse. It could be trains are late or anything else, but I always like to be there a good hour beforehand, and I go and find myself a cup of coffee. I've surprised several companies over the time that I've been in employment by turning up an hour before the interview and saying, "Sorry, I know I'm early, is there a canteen where I can have a cup of tea?" And I sit down and I read the paper, and then if they're late, you're there, and if they wish to be early, you're there as well. When it comes to the main interview itself, the advice I'm going to give is going to seem obvious, but I'm going to ask anybody who's going to an interview to write it down. Grab a pen and a piece of paper. You don't need laptops or computers or phones. They'll become distracting, and the company you're going to the interview with may not even have that technology. So a good old-fashioned pen and a piece of paper, and make a note of the following things because they're important. The first thing is to actually ask before the interview starts if the interviewer minds if you make notes. It's courteous and it shows you're paying attention. You'll already have notes hopefully on a piece of paper, things that you want to point out about yourself, questions that may have come to your mind, the places you looked for information on the company. You'll almost certainly be asked why you want to work there, so you will have worked that answer out beforehand. And the second question that you're always asked every single time is where you see your life going in the future. And it's worth spending some time. Talk to your friends again about that so you know the answers to those two questions. And as the interview progresses, listen. Active listening is incredibly hard. It's very hard to talk all the time, but it's even harder to listen all the time, particularly if you're somebody like me who likes talking. It's a discipline you have to acquire. When you're listening, make notes. Don't interrupt the person who's talking if they're asking questions or they're telling you about the company. Just make little notes. There is nothing more powerful than asking permission at the end of their spoke, if you mind if you ask questions, and then reeling those questions off in a friendly manner. Almost certainly if you ask questions and the interviewers ask questions, you'll open some form of conversation. So a monologue, which is how a lot of interviews that are unsuccessful end up, will become a dialogue, and dialogues promote understanding, and then you start to relax, the interviewer relaxes, and what actually started as a very formal process can actually become a very explorative, very discussive and actually enjoyable process. Now let's move towards the end of the interview. Generally, most interviewers that are good at what they do will ask if you have questions. If you're not asked that, ask if you can ask those questions anyway. When they say that's the end of the interview, there is nothing wrong with saying, "Thank you, could I just ask some questions before we go?" And the questions you should ask shouldn't be around about always what money is or anything else. Although there's always temptation you want to find out, remember why you're there is to secure employment. So the question should really be, what's expected of you? If you're not clear from the interview, ask what a typical workday will look like. That's a great question. It actually shows willing. Ask if there's an opportunity for travel if it's appropriate. Show willingness. Ask how much time you'll be spending with other people Ask who will be starting the job with you and training you. Ask if the company has training process, and if it isn't a company, if you're going to work with somebody self-employed, ask how much time you'll be spending on your own. In short, ask anything and ask everything. Because as an interviewer, I love those bits. Sometimes I've been tested. You get people who come along and you start chatting with them and you know you want to employ them before it gets to the end of the interview. Then you become something where you don't want to lose them. And the biggest ask of all is to ask if you've got the job. It's a funny thing. Most people think of this as a salesman's question, and it is. But if we're not selling ourselves in an interview, what are we doing? You can't just turn around and say, have I got the job? Because the answer you're going to get is, I've got other people to see, or I'll think about it. But what you can say is, I've really enjoyed today. I'd love to work here. Is there any reason you wouldn't employ me? It gives a chance to get that maybe last piece of information that never changed hands out, and you never know. It may be the difference between walking out with employment and going back to searching again.